almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man, nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had been and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children. Music, television, books.
Prey on children's innocence.
How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there, and no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
About time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
If you don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
Friday edition of the show. tstradio.info is the website. rdgable@yahoo.com is the email. And if you're on YouTube watching, you'll know that that is one of our social media sites, along with Facebook and X. Links are below in the show description, be that on YouTube or if you're in the audio-only archive where the majority of the audience listens. Click those links below and you can find everything you want or need to know about the show, including my books, including the advertisement-free archive, as well as other little interesting things about the show. That includes ways to support us outside of those books and subscriptions, like our Buy Me a Coffee option. Thank you so much for supporting the show, however you do, whether you're in the archive listening, buying a book, etc. We are only here because of listeners like you who keep us on the air, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And just like Ra, the Egyptian god, says, there will be no refunds. So if you don't like what you subscribe to, you don't get a refund. Is that okay? You don't get a refund? I mean, it's okay if you don't get a refund for giving money to people that promise you ascension. It's okay if you don't get a refund from people that promise hover cars or people that promise you that you're going to get alien technology. It's okay if you don't get a refund from that. So I hope it's okay you don't get a refund if you find yourself not enjoying the secret teachings, if you support us financially. I wanted to start tonight's show off by looking at the chat room and asking you in the chat, do you know what the law of one is? I knew what it was. I didn't know much about it. I knew what the talking points were, or at least most of the talking points, but I really didn't know what the law of one was. So I did a little bit of research, and by research, I mean I went to the Law of One Society and the Law of One website, and I did a little bit of reading. And it really didn't take long to find out that the Law of One is a combination of science fiction. I would call it paranoid delusional schizophrenia, and a bunch of random, probably unconscious, subconscious things that came through what was called channeling session, or a series of channeling sessions, over 100 back in the, I believe they started in probably the late 70s, early 80s. That's what I found out the Law of One was. It was really nonsense, and yet people repeat it as if it is a thing that you should hold faith in and believe, something equivalent to the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible or any other religious text. We're going to look at the Law of One tonight, and remember, as we look at it, there are no refunds if you don't like what you hear. Let's look at the chat room first, though. We go back to the very beginning of the chat tonight. TT is here. Marilyn Kluger is here. Diane Perry is here. No, Clyde Lewis will not be joining us tonight. He messaged me and said he's not feeling that great. Reno Mack is here. Hello, Reno. Reno said that he plays the show for people at work. I appreciate that, Reno. Joe Ryder is here, as well as Tim Curry, who says, I am raw. And Tim, I have that ready here. Let's see if we can find it in the... Hold on a second. We'll get it. There it is.
I am raw.
Yes, I am raw. Welcome to the show, Tim. Thank you for joining us tonight. We also have in the chat room, Rita Moore has joined us. Thank you for joining us tonight, Rita and Mistos Dokos, as well as HP Burrito and Combat Medic. I can't speak this morning. As well as, well, for me, it's the morning. For you, it's the evening. I just woke up here in Japan. Jackie is here. Hello, Jackie. Thank you for joining us again. Edward Preston is here. And I will scroll down to the end of this list and see if we have anybody else. Patriot Girl is here. Based Mike is here. Hello, Based Mike and Patriot Girl. And also Antonio is here, and Noka is here. Thank you for joining the show. Among others, I appreciate you tuning in on this Friday special edition of the Secret Teaching. So let's look at the Law of One. Does anybody in the chat know what the Law of One is? Flux is here, and he said, no, I am raw. Well, see, that's an interesting thing, Flux. You're joking, but who is the real raw? Because I've been to a number of conferences where there were more than one person claiming to be raw. And I was confused. I was like, are you raw? Are they raw? I'm not really sure. Who's the real raw? It's like that Spider-Man meme. You know, everybody's pointing fingers at each other. Who's the real Spider-Man? Who's the real raw? I don't know. I have no idea. Do you know who the real raw is? You know, I would suspect that if you were to ask some of those people who claim to be raw, who raw actually is, I would imagine that you don't get like a mythological answer because they don't know. I'm just speculating here. I would expect that you get some kind of like new age science fiction interpretation of what raw is, which is contrary to the mythology. And then I would imagine that if you were to ask them, where did you get that definition? That's not really who raw is or what raw represents. You'd probably get a response that is equivalent to, well, I am raw, so the mythology books are wrong. I know what I'm talking about because I am actually the god Ra. That's how I would imagine that conversation going down. It's hard to actually get a conversation with those people if you're at an event because those kinds of people are I mean, it's like they have guards. You can't get close to them. They're very, very popular, and they can't be bothered. Ra can't be bothered by questions from the proletariat. But I have a mythology book here, and I've given you a reference to this book before. It's like a bargain mythology book, and I use it because it is like a bargain book, and it's something that anybody can go and buy. And I thought we would look at this book, or you could pull up a encyclopedia online as well. I should probably do that so you can see on the screen. And if we look at this book, we can get like an idea of who Ra is. We can look at the mythological definition of who Ra is. Now, Ra, I think off the top of your head, you'll probably know Ra is a solar deity, is a sun god. I see Teresa in the chat said sun god, and you're right. Ra is a sun god. Ra is also, though, just one aspect of the sun. There are three aspects of the sun, just like there is the creative energy, there is the sustaining energy, and there is the destructive energy. The sun creates, the sun preserves, and the sun can also destroy. And then cycles are repeated, and the sun is resurrected, as is the vegetation. And then whether or not we're even aware of our own human existence, it becomes obvious at some point in human history that if this is happening repeatedly to the world, seasons change, there's snow, and then there's a hot summer. And if this is happening repeatedly to plants, they're dying, they're coming back to life after the winter, it's probably happening to us too. So this is likely where the idea of reincarnation comes from, because everything else comes back to life. We probably come back to life as well. So there are different aspects of Ra, and these different aspects of Ra represent the morning, the noon, and the afternoon sun. So, for example, Khepri, Khepri, is the morning sun. Timu, yes, spelled just like the cheap Chinese company that you buy things from on the app, that is the evening sun. And Ra is the midday sun. And so you can see a depiction of this. I will show you a page from my book, Occult Arcana. This image that you see on your screen right now is a depiction of those three deities. Khepri, the morning sun, Ra, the noonday sun, and Temu, or Atem, the setting sun. So you see, physically, the god gets larger and then smaller as the day goes on. This is the arc in the sky. And you can see the Urius serpent on the solar disk. You can see the scarab on the head. Now, you could look at that image and you could say, well, this is clearly an example of genetic engineering, because people don't have scarabs for heads, and people don't have birds for heads, or hawks for heads. And I'll admit, in my earlier days, I thought it was a little bit humorous to hear people talk about Egyptian gods representing genetic engineering. And then you realize, well, actually, there's another way to interpret it. And it's a pretty universal interpretation that has existed throughout all of human history. And that is that these gods are not genetically engineered humans with the heads of scarabs. That doesn't make any sense. What they actually are expressions of ideas and concepts. And when you see a human and an insect, or a human and an animal merge together, like a centaur, for example, that means that this person, this being, embodies the characteristics of, in this case, a hawk, or in this case, a scarab, or any other creature, a horse, a half horse, half man. Now, a guy with a scarab head's not as sexy as a guy with a horse body, but it's a representation of an idea, of an element, of an energy, of a thing. It's not genetically engineered. But the same people who think that it means genetic engineering, I think, are the same people who don't know the mythology, and I think are the same people who also believe the law of one, which I can tell you now, the law of one's not wrong per se, because it's just like if you took some of the best of hits in music and put them all into one CD and sold it, people would buy it because those are the best hits. Those you could get all the songs on one CD. Maybe I'm too old and I still thinking about CDs. We don't use CDs much anymore, but CDs, put them all into one disc. Got to get the disc. It's got all the best songs from all the best artists. That's like what the law of one is. It's like all the best science fiction concepts, all the best ideas from ancient philosophy, or at least the popular ones, and then you just merge it all together. And so it's kind of hard to say the law of one's not incorrect. It's kind of hard to say that it's, it's something other than like it's sure it's real. Like there's truth in the concept, but it's also not like anything new. And it's when you look at this depiction of Ra, understanding that Ra is an aspect of the sun automatically undercuts, undermines, and just obliterates the law of one narrative, because you can't be talking to an aspect of the sun. At least I don't think that you can. You could talk to something that identifies as that aspect of the sun. You can talk to something that identifies maybe as a solar principle, like a king might take on the image of a god. But you really can't talk to Ra in that way, because Ra's not a person or even really a spirit. And that reminds me of when recently we heard that there was a team who did an investigation of the pyramids at Giza. And they claimed that they found the halls of Amente. Remember that? And I thought it was really interesting because I remember reading about the halls of Amente, and I don't think that you can find the halls of Mente, because I'm pretty sure that it's a metaphor. Now, maybe it's a physical place. It's something that was built, relatively recently in human history, by one civilization or another. Maybe it's a real place, but traditionally, like the halls of Amente is a concept. And so if it's a concept, you can't find a concept. Like you can't, let's say you can't talk to Ra, because Ra is an idea. I mean, you could talk to the sun, I guess. I mean, maybe we call that delusional, but like if you're talking to Ra, what aspect of Ra? So that's important to know. That's important to understand. That is, unless, as Flux says in the chat, the sun is sentient. Maybe it is sentient. It might be. I don't know. I really don't. There's a thought that the sun may be a super advanced quantum computer. Maybe it is. I really don't know. But what I do know for sure is that Ra, in this context, is one aspect of a solar trinity, kind of like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the Trimurti. And so if you're talking to Ra, you're also probably talking to Khepri and Timu, unless you're, I guess, talking only to Ra during the middle of the day, which of course then connects Ra to the work of Jesus and the heavenly kingdom and the Most High, because that's when the sun is most high at noon. So maybe the sun is conscious. Maybe it's it is historically and esoterically, we refer to the planets as being intelligences. They have their own signatures, but they don't have arms. They're not writing a signature. Signature as in like energy signature. Although Night Stalker makes a great point. You get high enough, you can talk to anything. That's accurate. And I wonder how high the people were who were recording these Law of One sessions. But I will say also that, I get a laugh out of what Night Stalker says, but when people say, oh, they were on drugs or people got high and that's how they saw UFOs. Well, yeah, you probably did. You take enough DMT in the right setting or the wrong setting. You smoke the wrong thing at the wrong time. You don't have the right state of mind. I'm not a big fan of doing any of that. I'm not a fan at all of doing any of that. But from what I've read, including the Strassman DMT study, you do see things. And so I don't know. That's interesting that Night Stalker that Derek brings that up, because I'm glad that he brought that up, because it's kind of like the argument with religion, where people say, well, these religious texts were just plagiarized or copied from the past. And it's like, yeah, they were, but that doesn't undermine them. That kind of reinforce them in the same way that people say, oh, well, you're on drugs, it doesn't count. Well, actually, I think it does count, because you are seeing something. There's something there, and it's something that the shamans have interacted with. It's something that our ancestors clearly had interacted with through one substance or another. There's a whole bunch of them. Blue water lily in Egypt, which we know is the water of life, and we see that in Frank Herbert's Dune. We know about the usage of poppy or peyote or ayahuasca, things like that. This is a universal thing all over the world. Although I read that it wasn't as, I don't think that there's really any history of it here in Japan, which I find to be peculiar. That there's very little, if any, history of the type of that type of usage of things like that here in Japan. Maybe that information is lost. Anyway, let's go to the mythology book and let's just get an idea of who Ra is. There's not much to read here, but let's just get an idea of who Ra is. Ra is the supreme manifestation of the sun god at Heliopolis, was a hugely important member of the Egyptian pantheon. He was said to have come into being on the primeval mound that rose out of none, and to have proceeded to plan creation. Sometimes, however, he was depicted as a child rising out of a lotus flower, so there's a link to Buddha here as well. The Egyptians believed that each day the sun god was born. In the morning, after his bath and breakfast, he began his journey across the sky in his boat and would spend one of the hours of the day inspecting each of his 12 provinces, which of course are the houses of the zodiac. And his boat is the disc, or what we would call the flying disc, the flying saucer. So this is one of the original flying saucers, and it would crash and then be recovered each day, kind of like Roswell. When the sun went down, Ra was believed to enter the underworld until the morning, when he was born again. All night long, the supreme god had to fight his enemy Epep, which is the serpent, which goes back to what someone in the chat a moment ago had said. I can scroll back up and find it. Someone in the chat, maybe you can post it again. They said something about the god Apollo and their link to Ra. And considering that Apollo was able to kill the python at Delphi, it does, of course, link Ra to Apollo, because Apollo kills the python and Ra has to fight and struggle with Apep. And of course, you'll recall probably that the organization we call NASA, they did a Apep ritual a couple of years ago during the eclipse. Remember that? Where they fired projectiles at it to do an experiment. And this was actually I read this in an encyclopedia at the time, that the Egyptians used to perform a drama, a ritual, when there was an eclipse, when the sun disk was being consumed or the barge was being eaten by Apep. They would fire spears at it. So NASA quite literally conducted an old Egyptian religious ritual. Ra gave birth to Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. According to one myth, the pair disappeared to explore the universe. When Ra finally found them, he was so relieved that he burst into tears. From his tears, the first human beings were formed. Obviously, this is not literal. If you think it's literal, you might need to consult a professional. Another tale tells how when Ra was old and dribbling, as an old dribbling man, the goddess Isis determined to discover his secret name. She made a snake from earth, moistened with the great god's spit, and positioned the snake beside a path where the god liked to walk. In due course, the snake bit Ra, poisoning him, causing him such agony that he cried out in pain. Isis agreed to cure him only if he would reveal his name. Ra's suffering was such that he eventually agreed to disclose his secret. Isis promised not to pass on her knowledge to anyone but Horus, and by speaking the god's true name, healed him. Of course, we know this idea from Yahweh, or if you watch Harry Potter, he who shall not be named. That's why Hippocrates keeps the finger over the lips. The pharaohs called themselves sons of Ra, like the sons of God. Not only because he was held in great awe, but also because he was said to have created order out of chaos. Ra was usually depicted as a falcon wearing a sun disk on his head. So that is the story of Ra. And if you're going to tell people that you're talking to Ra, I would expect that there would be something in the Law of One that would correlate with some of these stories. The problem is, since it's a myth and since it's metaphors and allegories and symbols, Ra wasn't actually bitten by a serpent. I mean, if you attribute the decline of the sun to a serpentine figure, even Scorpio, the backbiter, and the sun dies, well, then, okay, Ra was bit by a snake, Ra is attacked by a serpent, and that's how you describe the story. And I don't think that the priests who maintain these religious principles believed it to be literal. I believe that they understood exactly what was happening. They understood the scientific mechanisms of what was happening in the heavens. But these were stories that were told, in one case, to inform and to educate the public, so the people would tell these stories and maintain these stories. But in the process, they would also be passing on, without even realizing it, scientific explanation for what was happening. A snake eating the sun. Okay, you say, oh, that's stupid. That's really stupid. Well, yeah, if you think it's literal, then yeah, it's pretty stupid. But it's not literal. It's symbolic. And since it's symbolic, it conveys a deeper meaning. It's an allegory. It's metaphor. And now this is important because, again, you can't talk to a metaphor. Now, maybe the sun, as Flux in the chat said, maybe the sun is conscious, or as Derek said, if you take enough drugs, you can talk to anything, accurate and true. But if you're talking to Ra, and Ra's conveying information to you, and that information is not unique, it's not even really philosophical in some cases, it's more science fiction, chances are you're not talking to Ra. And plus, this thing with names really, I think, is an important thing that we need to consider, not just in the case of geopolitical issues like Israel. Like, what does Israel actually mean? Yisrael, it means to struggle with God. It has nothing to do with a group of people that have a religious identity or some genetic features. I mean, it can mean that, but it also has another meaning. And that's just the definition of the word. I think it's the same thing when we're talking about Ra. Something identifies itself as Ra. Oh, it must be the sun god of Egypt. That's why he knows so much about Atlantis in the Law of One. But even if you read the Atlantis part of the Law of One, it's basically this. I can read the same story in the Secret Teachings of All Ages. I don't need to channel anything. I don't need to go read what someone else channeled. I mean, there are volumes written about Atlantis. There are volumes written about what I'll put back on the screen here, which is the Trinity, or the triune aspect of the God. And you see 4 characters here because the fourth one, of course, is regeneration, as he dies and is resurrected again. I don't know if someone's being serious in the chat. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but someone in the chat, Set Scales, maybe that's like Set as in the maybe this is the real Set in the chat tonight, because he doesn't like Osiris or Ra. Ra is not the sun, but a usurper who masquerades as the sun and the light. You might want to check the mythology book if you actually believe that, unless you're being sarcastic. I can't tell. Also want to welcome to the chat Apocryphy. Apocryphy just joined us in the chat. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate the support. And from you as well, Teresa. Thank you for joining us in the chat room. Now, I did see something else interesting here. Okay, Set Scales did say, he said, or he or she said, Atom, or they corrected themselves, Atom is the first light. Well, yeah, it depends on how you interpret it. The first light of the new day, and the new day starts with the end of the old day because it's a cycle. So Temu or Atum is the end, but also the beginning. So there you have the Alpha and the Omega again. There you have the beginning and the end again. And there you have the sons of Ra, because we are all sons of the sun, or daughters of the sun. And in that context, as Reno Max says in the chat, the demiurge. Well, if you were to interpret this Gnostically, the physical, I can look up and see it, sun, that physical sun, would be the architect, in a sense, of the physical world. So would be the demiurge. But I'd also caution that if you were to read about the demiurge from David Icke, I really like a lot of David Icke stuff, but I think David Icke might need to check on some of the sources of these stories, because I've heard David Icke also pushing the owl is Moloch thing too, and that's just inaccurate, plain and simple. So what exactly is the demiurge? A lot of it is interpretation, and a lot of it is the up to the individual to decide what it means ultimately, because the demiurge to one person is evil and to another one is good. All right, so now we have an idea of what Ra is, and we have an idea of what the aspects of Ra are. Let's go to the actual Law of One. Let's go to their website. I'm assuming that this is like an official website. I don't know who runs this, but I found 2 Law of One websites, and we will, I mean, you can go to these for free. There's no paywall or anything, and you can read all about the Law of One. It's not really that interesting, but for the sake of tonight's show, when I did the first Law of One show earlier this week, I got some entertainment value out of it. Patriot Girl says, the true children of light of God, right? We're not the children of Ra, we're the children of Christ, we're the children of God. Well, didn't God create light? And in the historical, mythological, let's call it record, the sun is the physical expression of the creator of God. So when you deny that the sun is significant or important or has meaning or value or purpose, then you're kind of dismissing the physical expression of God. So kind of like when people say, well, it's not plagiarized. Well, I don't think it's plagiarized, certain books of the Bible. I just think that they're repeating what was already written, which actually reinforces the underlying points that have been made for centuries. Noka said, if you've read Ryan's books, you would not want a refund. Well, it doesn't really matter what you want, Noka, because Raw says no refunds anyway. You don't really get a choice in the matter. And I can't do anything about that. It's Raw. He's the chief god. He says no refunds. There's no refunds. Like, my hands are tied. All right, let's look at this website, Law of One Society. I don't know the significance of this particular website, but this gives you an idea of like what the Law of One is. And then we can look at the actual lawof1.info. I'm assuming that this is like an official Law of One source. I mean, I've looked at the book one time. I found it in a bookstore in Florida, and I read a few lines, and I just didn't get it, and didn't buy the book either. And I was traveling at the time, so I didn't buy the book. And I never really went back and looked at the Law of One, because why would I read the Law of One? Why would I read something that's kind of like a SparkNotes version mixed with science fiction when I could just consult the actual sources of the same stories that are being, like, if I want to read the Law of One, I'll just go read Dune. If I want to read the Law of One, I'll just go watch Star Trek. And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. I'm saying that because literally it's just taking things from those sources. It's just plain and simple. It's taking things from Star Trek. It's taking things from Star Wars. It's taking things from Dune, which came out before Star Wars. And Dune came out in like the early mid-60s. It's taking things from older books back in the 30s, back in the 1800s. Very, very old stuff. So if I want to read about this kind of stuff, I'll just go be entertained by the movies and the television shows. I'll just go read the books. I'll just, I'll consult science fiction instead. Yeah, I think there's actually more value in science fiction. In fact, when I read on the air the other night, when I read some of these Law of One things, and yes, Jackie in the chat, you're right, Jackie, isn't the Law of One a Wilcock thing? Yeah, he sees this is like his Bible. This is David Wilcock, the former now disgraced ancient alien star. This is his Bible. Well, if you consult the Law of One, it says, I don't care what the Law of One says, David. It's just a regurgitation of science fiction and a little bit of philosophy. You probably actually would get more value out of watching Star Trek. I've read the whole Dune series. I mean, you would get more out of reading Dune than you would have. And I mean that literally. In my book, Occult Arcana, I even have a whole section on Dune and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and the occult origins of them. Because, you can get more out of literally watching a science fiction movie than you can out of reading the Law of One. At least that's my assessment of it. Maybe you disagree, but that's my assessment of it. So before we read anything about the Law of One, let's get like a time frame down here. Dune came out in 1965. The next year, the original Star Trek aired on NBC in 1966. In 1977, Star Wars A New Hope premiered. In 1979, Star Trek The Motion Picture was released. And then in 1984, the first Dune came out. That was the David Lynch Dune, which really wasn't that good. Maybe at the time it was good. It's obviously not very good now. So 1965, 66, 1977, 1979, and then we can stop before we hit 1984, because in the middle of all of that is when the Law of One was first released, when the channelings were supposedly, reportedly concluded or were finished. 1981, 1984, somewhere between there, these channelings were hundreds, 106, I think, is the total that they did, and they were put together, and then they were concluded within that time frame. Now it's strange, because you would think that the people that were channeling this would have recognized, if they were doing this honestly, and maybe they did mention this or talk about this at one point or another, but you would think that the people that were doing this were honest. Don Elkins, the physics professor who was asking the questions, Carla Ruckert, the instrument, who was in a deep trance talking to Ra, or Ra was talking through her, Jim McCarthy, the scribe who was writing it all down. You would think that they were honest. They'd be like, this sounds strangely similar. Like, this sounds basically like all of the groundbreaking science fiction stories that came out just before we did these channelings. Now, if Dune and Star Trek and Star Wars came out, books or movies, if they came out after the Law of One, I might put a little bit more weight on the Law of One. But I have a hard time doing that when Dune comes out in 65, then Star Trek, then Star Wars, and then right at the tail end of all of that groundbreaking science fiction, which of all of those, I think I'm a fan of Dune, Star Trek, and Star Wars in that order. Then the Law of One comes out. And the Law of One actually, I think it officially came out, would have been the same year that the first Dune movie came out. So those are like the three major groundbreaking science fiction series. I don't think Dune gets the respect it deserves, but those are three groundbreaking science fiction series. And for some reason, they just, I guess, ignore that. It's just all maybe confirmation Ra was putting that there in the science fiction so that he could reveal the truth to people through science fiction and then teach them something else with these channelings. As Derek in the chat said, Derek said, Star Trek inspired by the Council of Nine channeling sessions in 1952 of entities claiming to be Ra and other gods. Now, see, that is a very good point, Derek. I talked about that on the first Law of One show we did earlier this week, is that if you go back with Gene Roddenberry, he did claim that some of the stuff for Star Trek was channeled. I'm not sure how much, but a portion of some of the more significant points. So you could argue, I'm not heard anybody do this, but you could argue that then that the Law of One was channeling the same source as Star Trek, and that's why the science fiction was so similar previous to the Law of One coming out to Law of One when it came out after the science fiction. You could argue that's why, because they were both channeling the same source. But ultimately, you could go back to the Vril Society, which is mostly fictitious, but there is maybe something kind of in a way real about it. But either way, the Vril Society, where, well, the story is that there were a bunch of women that didn't cut their hair and they channeled these beings and got technology from them and stuff like that. The Vril is like an energy, like a force, like in Star Wars, and you can heal or you can destroy with this energy. It's basically the life energy of the universe, which is really what the sun, or the solar system in our case, of what the sun actually is, or what any sun actually is. The Vril Society supposedly channeled technology, which here's something for Mr. David Wilcock, and for those of you who are a non-fan of Mr. David Wilcock. If you are a channeler of, like, say, the Archangel Michael, which now he's said that he can't do that because his conscious mind got in the way. He's admitted that. Why don't they just channel the technology through the Archangel Michael, or get in contact with Ra and channel the technology for hover cars? I also find it interesting that these gods, whether it's Ra or it's an angel like the Archangel Michael, again, a concept and not an actual person. But I find it interesting that these beings want to give us technology, or they want to help us develop technology that is just, it's equivalent to what we've imagined growing up would be the future of transportation. I just find that to be strange. Like cars, which here, even on planet Earth, if you were to come to Japan, there's a lot of cars, but most people walk and take trains. So cars are not a big part of life here. And you can get a car pretty cheap. Like you can buy a standard basic car for like $5,000 US. And you can get a normal size, like American size car. You have to pay more tax on that, of course. And it's cost more to fix and all this. But like even in the modern world, you come to a place like Japan, or there's many parts of the world, cars really aren't a big thing. People just take public transportation or they walk, especially in undeveloped countries. So from the United States or from Europe to claim that you're talking to these infinitely powerful beings and they want to help us get flying cars, I just find that to be utterly absurd. I find that to just be the smoking gun of this is totally made up. This is total nonsense. Unless, maybe I'm undeveloped. Maybe I'm just not that aware and conscious. Why wouldn't intelligent beings that transcend time and matter, why wouldn't they want to help us build flying cars? Why wouldn't they want to help us levitate? Sure. We could also talk about the idea of levitation and all of that, and how that probably is also a metaphor as well. Okay, so let's look at the Law of One. Without any further ado, let's look at the Law of One. The Law of One starts off with this, and we'll play it here from David Wilcock. Here it is. Oops, I played it too fast. Here it is.
I am Ra. It is an honor.
Yeah, just awful. But that is how the Law of One one of the sessions begins. I am Ra. I think he probably begins most of the sessions with that, but that's how he begins session 4 here on the website. I am Ra, the law of one. Though beyond the limitations of name, as you call vibratory sound complexes, may be approximated by stating that all things are one, that there is no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love, light, love, the infinite creator. Now, I find it peculiar that that particular statement is on the home page. Why? Because it doesn't take much reading if you go to the first session and you Command F, you type in love, and you go down to, I think it's the first question here. This is what Ra says. I am Ra. We communicate now. We too have our place. We are not those of the love and the light, or of the light. We are those who are of the law of one. So whatever this thing is, it's not of the love or the light. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that kind of dismantle, nuke, obliterate, destroy, like one of the most repeated, nonsensical, annoying talking points of the new age, whatever? Everybody just says love and light, right? Someone asks a question. Hey, isn't that from Star Trek? Love and light. Don't be negative. But the thing that they're quoting from says, we're not even of the love or of the light. So I'm confused about that. Maybe a law of one expert can help me figure that out. Jez in the chat said, Ra says you can pay by credit card. Yes, Ra takes Visa. Ra probably even takes EBT, really anything that you want to give him, any kind of offering. He'll take gift cards. Ra mysteriously sounds like an Indian guy on the phone. Sir, I'm going to need your social security number. Ra will take anything. And that's the Ra deal. So the love and the light, they're not really of the love and the light. So that's a little bit confusing to me. I thought that they were of the love and light. Although I guess you could say, well, he's of the all. He's of the law of one. And that is love, light, love. But see, I honestly did not know that this talking point was from the law of one. I didn't know that until this week. I had heard it in relation to the law of one, but I didn't know that that's really where it started. So when people say things like love and light and love, and then sue you, to me, what it sounds like is I'm being gaslit, I'm being manipulated by people that are really dumb and don't actually have anything to say and don't really have any original thoughts. They just repeat talking points and science fiction stories. And then when someone questions those stories and those talking points, they say, love and light, stop being so negative. You can see how this idea has worked its way into, in my experience, pretty much every aspect of more liberal culture in the United States. Don't be negative, man. Don't be negative. Guys say it. Ladies say it. Everybody says it. This is even in politics. You have an issue with something a politician did or a president or a Congress. Don't be negative. Well, you hate America. Don't be negative. That idea, I think, is I think it's satanic because I think that it is oppositional to logic. It is oppositional to reason. It is oppositional to rationale. Just love and light. No, not just love and light. Not just love and light. It is what Patriot Girl in the chat said. It's toxic positivity. In quotes, positivity. It's toxic delusion. Corey Good says love and light pockets. What do you mean by love and light pockets? I think he said love, light, and litigation. That's been my line about Corey Good. Love, light, litigation. Love, light, litigation. Pound in the chat said the law of one may be the only thing David Wilkowicz has read and and we looked at David as scholarly level expert, I would imagine that if I was to actually have a conversation with David Wilcock and others that talk about the law of one, just like we talked about with Raw at the beginning of the show, I'm pretty sure. In fact, I'm sure enough that I would place a financial bet on it that these people would not even know the source of the things that they're repeating. Like they would know it's the law of one, but they wouldn't know where in the law of one. Like it took me less than 5 minutes, and I found out on the show live when we did the law of one show earlier this week. When I read that first little bit on the first session where Ra says, we're not of the love, we're not of the light. And, maybe there's more context that we're missing here, but people pull open the Bible, they open it and say, well, it says here that this is okay. And they use this verse to justify something. They use a verse in Genesis to justify genocide and to justify holy war. They use a verse to justify slavery or a verse to justify beating a woman or whatever. In the same way that you can open the law of one and you can say, well, see, it says here that love and light. Okay, but it also says here that they're not of the love and light. So if you're not of the love and light and you're just telling people to live in the love and light, I don't know, but maybe it is kind of satanic. And the people that really love the law of one, they love to run around screaming Luciferian, and not so much satanic, but they love to scream Luciferian, which is also peculiar because Lucifer is a fiery thing. Lucifer is a burning desire. Like when you have a burning desire for something, that's Lucifer. It is the fiery desire that you have for anything. That is, as Flux in the chat says, that is the false light, because those burning desires for those things that are physical are illusions. They're not real. Like, yeah, food is real by touch, but ultimately your body needs more than food, or you're just an animal, because you're a soul. So you have to nourish yourself spiritually as well. You hear stuff like that all throughout the Bible. Lucifer is a fiery substance, the fire of desire. Satan is opposition. So if you're going around and you're telling people, hey, I'm talking to Ra, or I listened to what Ra said. Well, hey, Ra is the noonday sun, fire illuminating the physical world. And Satan is opposition. And anytime anybody says something to you that you don't like and you're in the law of one, you say love and light, which is now extended beyond the law of one. Love and light, 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 light and love, and litigation. This whole thing really is satanic and Luciferian. Contrary to what the law of one faithful say, oh, it's Luciferian, oh, it's satanic, there's a picture of a goat, oh my God, there's a pentagram, it's just Luciferian. Actually, I'm sorry to break it to you, the law of one is Luciferian. The law of one is satanic. And it should not be used as a spiritual religious source of anything. Because if you're going to use it as a source of like spiritual enlightenment, I mean, you might as well literally just be watching Star Trek. In fact, Trekkies probably know more about this stuff than the people that read the Law of One. Star Wars nerds, I don't know what we call, I know Trekkies, I know that, but I don't know what we call Star Wars nerds. But if you're a Star Wars nerd, I'm pretty sure that you probably know more about this stuff than the Law of One people do. And if you're like me, you're not really a big fan of fiction, but you've read some, like I've read Dune. It's really the only, I haven't even finished Lord of the Rings. Dune is the only thing I've read all the way through. And just from reading Dune, and as I mentioned in my book, Occult Arcana, I have a little section on Dune. You can pull out of Dune all of those esoteric principles, the water of life, even the iconography in the movie, and you can pull out of it the concepts and the philosophies, the chosen one, death and resurrection of Paul, even Paul in the Christian tradition, who is Paul. So Paul Atreides. So like you can pull all that out of watching Dune. Literally, you can get more spiritual information out of a Frank Herbert book than you can get out of the Law of One. The Law of One, and I'll say this, directly into the camera. The law of one is satanic because it encourages people to believe in, quote, love and light, even though the being that they're quoting says it's not of the love and the light. So what is it of? It's of the reverse of those things. And the reverse of love is evil, evil. That would be the devil. And the reverse of light is darkness. And the darkness is of the cold, damp domain of the devil, the ice palace of Dante. It is Luciferian because it is a false light. The idea that you should never be questioned on the things that you do, never be questioned on the things that you believe. If you're questioned on those things, when you make poor decisions, when you say things that are nonsensical, when people try to hold you accountable for the nonsense that you spew, for the danger that you put yourself and others in, perhaps, with your beliefs, well, that is, it's the desire to always be right, the desire to never be wrong. That is Luciferian, a desire to be physical now. And when you're channeling and this being is telling you all of these things, Ra, in the mythology, is the being of, the deity of, the concept of the noonday sun, then that is the illuminating physical force. That is the thing that illuminates the physical world. So the being you're channeling is literally Luciferian. The being you're channeling is telling you to do things in opposition to logic and reason and rationale. The being you're channeling is satanic and Luciferian. Therefore, the law of one is Luciferian and satanic. And I'm pretty sure, because Satan is a liar, that if you're talking to anything that is disembodied, you're probably talking to wicked forces that are deceiving and manipulating you. And they're using terms and ideas that you've heard of and that you know, because that is, especially when this Law of One came out in the 80s after Dune and Star Trek and Star Wars, those things are familiar. And this thing, whatever it is probably poisoning the spiritual well, let's say. Otherwise, if you can get something of value out of the Law of One, great. But ultimately, based on what it's talking about and what this being is, what it might be, this is not a good source of information. It's actually a dangerous source of information. And I think it has led people into, at the best, conflict internally, and at the worst, conflict externally. It has poisoned, it has muddied, it has destroyed in the name of good, which is, I'm pretty sure, what, at least the energy of the Antichrist or Satan or Lucifer do. Again, let's not confuse the two. Satan is opposition, Lucifer is a fiery desire. So if you have a fiery desire for physical things, for physical love and physical light, then you are oppositional to the spiritual. And so you're definitely not going to, quote, ascend or transcend this reality. You're actually going to get stuck in it. And that is why the Law of One is Luciferian and satanic. And I challenge anybody who believes this stuff to talk with me about it, not debate. I don't do debates. It's not about winning or losing, but challenge my perspective on this. I got here from reading a few lines from the Law of One. People that claim to love this stuff and read it all the time, like people were talking about in the chat. I'm sure David Wilcock, he probably doesn't even know most of this. Hell, most Christians have never read the Bible cover to cover. I would, at least the New Testament, it's not that long. You could read the New Testament in a couple of days if you just took your time and sat down and read it. How many people have actually sat down and read the New Testament that call themselves Christians? I'm going to guess it's a very small percentage. I think it's probably the same thing with the Law of One. As a matter of fact, it's not just that way with the Law of One of the Bible. It's pretty much that way with a lot of things. I have a copy of The Secret Teachings of All Ages here behind me, you can see, behind my little Kokeshi doll. And that book, I have seen that book on the bookshelves of so many people that I know, or people that they know that I love that book, and they'll tell me the same, like, I know someone, or my boyfriend or my girlfriend has that book, and They quote from it, but they've never actually read it. I've heard that a lot from people. That's kind of what the law of one is. Because really, I mean, if you're a conscious being and you're really kind of informed, especially people like David Wilcock, if you're an expert, you're a channeler, you're this brilliant master of spirituality, reading a few sentences in the law of one would set off red alerts, and you would realize this is nonsense. This is science fiction. This is a poisoning of the well. What this thing is not of the love and of the light. I mean, the best case scenario, it's of the internal oppositional self, the one that just rejects and refuses to adapt and change, that just wants everything to stay the same. I think that's what it is. It's the internal person, or rather, maybe not person because that's persona. It's the internal self. And it's not just the internal self, it's the undeveloped internal self, which the law of one is supposed to teach you how to develop, and yet it's rooted in the undeveloped self. It really is devilish. It really is satanic and Luciferian in those terms. So next time you hear somebody talk about that, oh, it's Luciferian, it's Luciferian. They use that term all the time, Luciferian, Luciferian. I don't really think you know what Luciferian means. You might want to check the sources on that. What was that episode of Arrested? I love Arrested Development. I don't know if anybody ever watched that show. There's an episode of Arrested Development where they got the famous banana stand, and one of the characters' name is Maybe. She's like very rebellious, and she's telling the other guy, what was the kid's name? Is it George Michael is his name? And they're like, they want to leave the banana stand and go get something. They want to do something else. They don't want to work. She's like, well, if your dad comes by and counts the bananas, if there's no bananas, that means we made the sales, right? So they throw the bananas out and take $1 out of the register. Throw the banana out, take $1 out of the register. And so this other guy's standing there and he says, yeah, but we already paid for the bananas, right? Or I think maybe George Michael's, we paid for the bananas. So every time we throw a banana out, we're actually losing more money. And this other guy says like, yeah, you might want to recheck the math on that because I don't think you're doing that right. So I haven't seen that show for a long time, but it was something like that. He's like, yeah, you might want to recheck the math. I think you're going to need to recheck the myths. You're going to need to recheck the dictionary. You're going to need to recheck like what exactly it is that you're getting out of the law of one. What exactly is it? Just to feel good? Because heroin makes you feel good. I've never done it. I've heard that. That's why people do heroin. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. And so when people say, oh, well, I mean, the law of one, it helped me spiritually and it made me feel better and love and light. Anybody who's like literally every person I've ever interacted with who says love and light is usually a very, very, very hateful and spiteful and very dark person. And you'll notice that a lot of the people that love this stuff get very, very angry if you question the belief. So that's my assessment of it. We can go on to reading some of this law of one. I don't know if I've missed much in the chat room here. I've been trying to keep my eye on it as I do the show here. Miss Ostokos asked a good question. Does the same hold true for channelers such as John Dee? He was allegedly channeling angels, correct? Yes. So John Dee and Edward Kelly. It certainly holds true. The same assessment can be applied to John Dee and Edward Kelly. I think in the case of John Dee and Edward Kelly, they were doing something a little bit different. Sure, they were talking to so-called angels, and they developed the angelic script, which I will show you what that script looks like here. I'll pull it up so you can see it. I have to pull this off the screen first. Oh no, I can share. Actually, I can share two screens at once. We'll do that instead. Okay, this is from my book, Occult Arcana. You can see the angelic script here on the screen. So this is what they get out of it, the Angelica script, which is not really that much different from if you read The Magus by Francis Barrett, there's a bunch of different magical alphabets. So, at the worst, you could say they were automatic writing. It's all the unconscious, etc., stuff like that. But if they were talking to angels, the difference, I think, is, if there is a difference, I'm not like a big fan of John Dee and Edward Kelly. I'm not a ritual magician or anything like that. But I think the difference is, if you read the notebooks of these guys and you read, there's like volumes of text that were written about this. I feel like it's a little bit different than the Law of One, because they created like an entire magical system. And that magical system that they created is meant to, what's the best word? Help advance the spirit forward, or help to awaken, or help to move and free the spirit, in a sense, as opposed to the Law of One, which is like, you ever watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, where I think it's the Seinfeld reunion season. Maybe it's an earlier season, but they go to whatever the guy's name is that played George in Seinfeld, and he's like, yeah, since I'm retired, I've been working on a book, and he gives Larry David the book, and it's like this little tiny itty bitty pamphlet. He's like, yeah, that's like a decade of my life there. And they're like, well, it's not really a book. It's more like a pamphlet. This is a really tiny thing. The Law of One is like a little pamphlet in comparison with what John Dee and Edward Kelly did. The specifics of that is a great question. I don't really know. I can't really answer that question. But I do think that what John Dee and Edward Kelly did was probably a lot more valuable, at least in terms of magic, a lot more valuable than what the Law of One is. That's just my kind of feeling, my intuition about it. If you want to go into more detail, that's something maybe we could do in another show. It's something interesting to think about. I'll keep that in mind. Jackie says in the chat, in the Bible, every time an angel appears, the first words are, "Do not fear." So why should one trust channeling from an angel when it sounds like it is time to be afraid? I don't know if I understand exactly what you're saying, Jackie. Let me read that again. Maybe you can reword that. I don't know if I fully understand what you're saying there, Jackie. Tim Curley said that episode was hilarious. Yeah, I say what you want about the Protocols of Goyim. I'm a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Even when Larry David pees on Jesus, I still think it's funny. I mean, he makes fun of Jews and Muslims too, so it's okay. Makes fun of everybody. All right, let's go and actually read this Law of One. Let's go to the first session, January 1981. Let me do it like David Wilcock. I am Ra. It is a pleasure.
Ra.
Okay, I am Ra. I have not spoken through this instrument before. We had to wait until she was precisely tuned. As we send a narrow band vibration, we greet you in the love and in the light of our infinite creator. So I guess the infinite creator is love and light. Ra is not really of the love and light. He just gives it to you raw. He's not concerned about the love of the light. Now, when I read this the first time, my initial thought was, I'm already confused, because the whole idea here is that it's the Law of One. Everything is one. Everything is connected, right? Well, if everything is one, everything is connected, then how Ra has never spoken through this instrument before. Now, they're talking in this Ra or whatever it is, or the people that just made this stuff up. They're talking about the person who was the medium, the person who sat and actually did the quote channeling. That was Carla Ruckert. But if Carla Ruckert is part of the infinite, then wouldn't Ra have spoken through her before? If there's a time loop and everything is infinite and it's all connected, then wouldn't Ra have spoken through her before? I didn't understand that, because everything's one. So Ra's never spoken through this instrument before. Does he mean the human body? He's never spoken through the human body before. What about that whole thing that happened in Egypt where he was like the main god? Like, didn't the priest talk to him? And does he mean the human body, this particular person? If everything's one, wouldn't it all just be? It's like, it's been some time since I spoke through this instrument. It sounds like Bashar or Jay-Z Knight, where it's really just a production and the usage of words that sound Like I'm a big fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And, Charlie on that show is basically illiterate, except he can speak Gaelic, but he can't really read in English very well, but he can read Gaelic. He but Charlie's like illiterate. He really can't read. And that's kind of the the impression that, first of all, you get from the Law of One. Like, clearly there's something going on here with grammar. There's an issue here that if you just change it a little bit, it's like, oh, this, if you sound like a retard, oh, this must be an alien I'm talking to. If you talk like Yoda, then this must be an alien. I mean, Star Wars did just come out a few years before this, so it's probably. I'm surprised Raw didn't start off by saying, "Raw, I am spoken through this instrument before, I have not." I would have been like, people still be like, that's not like Yoda. This is Raw. That's Yoda's science fiction. This is real. But in that show, Charlie's basically illiterate. And when he wants to sound smart, he just says things like he wants to be a lawyer, but he's illiterate. So he'll just say things like filibuster or I object. He's like, those are lawyer words, right? Yes, Charlie, they're lawyer words. That's kind of what I get out of the Law of One, is it's just a lot of that. And they just repeat a lot of the same things that, again, are already in science fiction, things that you already know, things that the people that are doing this channeling and the scribing, things that they're going to be aware of, which is probably why when you read the first question, the first question assumes, it implies, I think it confirms and guarantees that the people that are doing this channeling already believe this stuff. So they have no question about what Ra is saying. They go directly into asking information on the, quote, Confederation, which we'll learn about here in a second. Like, if I was channeling something and something said, I'm Ra, etc., and this is what I'm here to do this and tell, I would ask for something else before I just said, hey, tell me about that Confederation. It's like when someone is like a paranoid schizophrenic and you don't play into the delusion. Even if someone's not a paranoid schizophrenic. Like, I don't think a child who sees things is paranoid schizophrenic. I think that they're probably seeing something, that they're tuned into a frequency that we can't see or hear as an adult. And I think that there's some science to back that up, some pretty basic science, to quote It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Some pretty basic science to back. Hornets don't make honey. Some pretty basic science to back that up. But I think that when a child sees things, I don't think they're delusional. I don't think that they're insane. But I guess depending on what it is that they say that they're seeing, I also probably wouldn't want to play into that, to be like, yeah, there probably is a monster under your bed. The kid's never going to sleep, ever. I also wonder how that works in other countries, because over here in Japan, kids usually sleep in the same room with the parents in the same bed, even because of space. So I wonder if I've always wondered that. Is there a difference in like childhood psychosis between, say, Japanese children and American children? Where in Japan, the spirits are everywhere. In America, the spirits are evil unless they're God on average. And like, you sleep in your parents' bed until you're a couple of years old, or you still sleep in the same room even after you're a couple of years old, small spaces. And in the US, where from the time you're born, you get your own room and you cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry, which is probably like, what was that doctor's name on the Rugrats? And I never got it until I was an adult. The doctor's name was Lipschitz. I think he was Jewish too, but his name was Lipschitz. Lipschitz. Never got that as a kid. But, giving all of this advice about children, that was just, I don't think it was always the best advice. So I wonder if kids over here actually have that kind of, they see things like kids in America do. Anyway, point is, you don't want to play into that because it could scare them. Or people that are actually delusional and paranoid, like, you don't want to play into that because, like, they could hurt somebody. They're so crazy they could hurt somebody. Kind of like the QAnon shaman. That guy's out of his mind, crazy. I don't think January 6th was a storming of the Capitol. I don't believe that, but I think the QAnon shaman was a crazy person, a psychotic person. So you don't play into that delusion. And that's the same thing goes for the law of one. You don't play into that delusion. Unfortunately, you're not really dealing with a person, you're dealing with an entity. So the person asking the questions in this case is already delusional. So they jump directly, immediately to asking this is Don Elkins, goes directly to asking about the Confederation. Okay, so let me read through this. We have watched your group. We have been called to your group, for you have a need for the diversity of experiences and channeling which go with a more intensive, or as you might call it, advanced approach to the system of studying the patterns of the illusions of your body, your mind, and your spirit, which you call seeking the truth. Just what a jumbled mess of nonsense that is. You know what that is? That's like somebody trying to sound smart. I'm going to do something here. Let's go to ChatGPT just out of curiosity. I'm going to plug this paragraph into ChatGPT and I'm going to ask it correct for grammar and spelling just to see. Correct this statement for spelling and grammar and explain what is wrong with it if something is wrong. Let's see what ChatGPT says about how Ra speaks. We've been called to your group for you have a need for the diversity of experiences and channeling which go with a more intensive, or as you might call it, advanced approach to the system of studying the patterns of the illusions of your body, mind, and spirit, which you call seeking the truth. Here's a correct ChatGPT corrected it. Here's a corrected version of your statement. We'll let that load for a second, and we'll come back to it. The Confederation of Planets in the service of the infinite creator has only one important statement: live long and prosper. Sorry, that statement, my friends, as you know, is all things, all of life, all the creation is part of one original thought. Which, funny and ironically, that is not an original thought. That is like a very old thought. It's probably one of the oldest philosophical thoughts in human history. And it's kind of the basis for most spiritual practices. Yes, even in polytheism, because all branches of the Godhead are just part of the original. We will exercise each channel, if we are able to, the reception of our beam. It's just a funny way that they speak, is a somewhat more advanced feat that some of the more broad vibration channels opened by other members for more introductory and intermediate work. Let us for a moment consider thought. What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? Oh my God, it literally speaks like Yoda. Okay, I didn't read this part. It took you then thought today. It literally sounds, okay, so it is basically just, they saw Star Wars. Ra talks like Yoda. Ra is Yoda. Took you then thought today. What thoughts did you think today? What thoughts were part of the original thought today? And how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? Was love contained? And was service freely? Just total nonsense. Was service freely given? You are not part of a material universe. You are part of a thought. You are dancing in a ballroom in which there is no material. You are dancing thoughts. You move your body, your mind, and your spirit in somewhat eccentric patterns for you have not completely grasped the concept that you are part of the original thought. So that's kind of like Ra's attempt at the allegory of Plato's cave. That's my assessment. I think it's kind of like Plato's cave. Now, in regard to dancing, we do know that James Rink was not ready to ascend because he was a prolific dancer, and he is dancing up and down and all over that ballroom. So I guess you could interpret this as you're not supposed to dance, which obviously that's not what they're saying. But if you want to be dumb, you could say you're not supposed to dance. Ra said don't dance because you're not connected to source when you dance. Which it's also kind of funny that that this thing says dancing because, again, all of the all of the major spiritual religious practices throughout all of history, dancing was a really important part because they believed, I know this is clearly supposed to be a metaphor or an allegory, but it literally was you putting yourself into energetic compatibility, into a frequency with the universe. That's where the whirling dervishes of Persia come from. You are connecting to something that is bigger than you. You're putting yourself into harmony. You know, the Celtics, the Druids, would not dance, as the stories go. They would not dance toward the west. They only danced toward the east. They only moved toward the east in their ritual dancing movements. Why? Because the east is where the sun rises. And if you dance toward the west, you're dancing towards death. So if there's any kind of spiritual background here in the people that are doing this channeling, that might be where this is coming from. And we do know that Don Elkins was a UFO researcher, studied paranormal activity, reportedly looked at it from a scientific point of view. I don't know what that means historically. Like what is science to someone who might not be a scientist? Or, I mean, people use that term today. I mean, there's all kinds of people like, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, but really you're not. You just play one on the internet. So that's an important piece of information, that Don Elkins was a UFO paranormal guy anyway. So he already had a background of knowledge on this stuff. And that's probably why this stuff is so elementary, because if you just have an elementary concept of spiritual or spirituality and myths, etc., then you're probably going to provide a very elementary version of those things. If you're channeling something and asking questions, it's going to be based on your lack of understanding of more complex subjects. Okay, let's skip through to the first question. What is the Confederation? Does it have a specific purpose? This is the question. This is what the questioner, Don Elkins, is asking. What is the Confederation? So we just assumed we know what the Confederation is. Ra says, I am Ra. We communicate now. We too have our place. We are not those of the love and light. That's probably not good. We are those who are of the law of one. In our vibration, the polarities are harmonized, the complexities are simplified, and the paradoxes have their solution. We are one. That is our nature and our purpose. Now, hold on a second. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of sounds like the Borg, which goes back to what Derek was saying earlier about how Star Trek was, in part, derived from channeling sessions. So if you're channeling something like this being, whatever this being is, and it is telling you, I'm not of the love and light, I'm of the all, I'm the what do we call it? I'm the Godhead. I'm everything united. Complexities are simplified. Paradoxes have their solution. Polarities are harmonized. It sounds, in one respect, like there's a positive thing happening here. But it also, because the devil, Satan, and Lucifer, in one respect or another, are deceivers, it also kind of sounds like if you're talking to anything, you're talking to the Borg. Now, considering how closely related the Law of One is to Star Trek, and considering that Star Trek itself is partly derived from channeling sessions, maybe there is something here that's real. Maybe there's something here that's legitimate. And if there is something here that's real and legitimate, then what these people are talking to is again back to my point about Satan and Lucifer and this being Satanic and Luciferian, they're talking to the Borg. And this is just another example of how the law of one, it's not looking good. So we now have two pieces of information here. They're not of the love and light, and they are of the one, the all. I mean, if you're not of the love and light and you're of the one and the all, that sounds like, at least just symbolically speaking, it sounds like you're the bad guy here. It doesn't sound like you're the good guy. We are old upon your planet and have served with varying degrees of success in transmitting the law of one, of unity, of singleness to your peoples. Where's Derek Murphy? Derek Murphy still in the chat? Because that, to me, sounds a little bit like the old gods. We are old gods on your planet. We've been here for a long time. We've been transmitting the law of one, the law of unification. We have walked your earth. We'll see. Unless you interpret that as the sun reflecting off of water or the ground, then this is not raw. This is something that, if it once walked the earth and now is not walking the earth, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's something else, but it definitely isn't the spiritual concept of the solar principle. It is definitely not part of the Godhead. You could say, well, okay, it's a little bit like Jesus. Jesus was he's Son of God, and he walked the earth and all that. Okay, I mean, if that is the case, if it's kind of like Jesus, it's kind of like I'm processing this as I'm doing the show live. I don't have notes here. I'm just looking at the website for the Law of One. It's kind of like, maybe by walking the earth, maybe it's the unconscious. Maybe it's the dark side of the self. We'll get to that in a second too, because the dark side, the light side, just like the Confederation and the Borg, these are Star Trek, Star Wars, and old theological concepts. Again, nothing here is unique. Nothing here is new. This is not so with many of the entities of the Confederation. We found it was not efficacious. However, we then felt the great responsibility of staying in the capacity of removing the distortions and powers that had been given to the Law of One. We will continue in this until your, shall we say, cycle is appropriately ended. It kind of sounds like a threat to me. If not this one, then the next. We are not a part of time and thus are able to be with you in any of your times. So that also doesn't sound good in relation to the Borg, because they have cubes. The cube is of Saturn. Saturn is the god of time. The more that I'm reading, the more I'm thinking the Law of One is not just Satanic and Luciferian. Now I'm starting to think the Law of One might actually be channeled information from aliens, and these are the old ones, and they're trying to do something malicious here. Again, where is Derek Murphy in the chat? Derek, you got to get in on this. We are the old ones upon your planet. Wow. I'd never read that part before. I only read down to the first answer, the first question in the first show we did. Let's go further. Does this give you enough information from which to extract our purpose, my brother? I don't like when people talk like that. And that also sounds suspicious too. Like this alien thing is my brother. I'm not your brother. I don't know who you are. What's that movie, A Sphere, with, was that Samuel L. Jackson and I forget who else was in that movie, where they're talking to that alien. What's the alien's name in Sphere? Talking to the alien, and they think it's a human at first, but it's actually like a giant sentient. Well, I don't want to give away the movie if you haven't seen it. It's like an alien. Yes, it does. Thank you. That's it. This is exactly what you hear when you watch like a Project Camelot video, or if you watch James Rink interview people, or you watch Billy Carson, or any of these so-called enlightened masters, spiritual teachers, connoisseurs of the truth, this is how they respond. You ask somebody a question. So you worked on the moon? You were on Mars? You were eaten by aliens and put back together in a med bed, Randy Kramer? And they explain this fantastical, ridiculous, utterly absurd, worse than science fiction story. And the response you get to that is, other than a follow-up question, yes, it does make sense. Thank you. Ra responds, we appreciate your vibration. Is there another query? Questioner, I've heard of the name Ra in connection with the Egyptians. Are you connected with that Ra in any way? Ra says, I am Ra. Yes, the connection is congruency. I thought it said, wait, okay, I'm sorry. Maybe my mind is in the gutter. I thought Ra said, I am Ra. Yes, the connection is congruency. May we ejaculate. It's may we elucidate. Maybe may we hallucinate. Questioner, please do. Ra says, what do you not understand? Questioner, could you give me a little more detail about your role with the Egyptians? Now, I mean, it's just such an elementary response. I heard Ra's like an Egyptian god, right? Can you tell us more about that? I mean, that is like a James Rink question. That is like a David Wilcott question. Nothing about the fact that they describe themselves as like the Borg. Nothing about the fact that they say they're not of the love and light. Could you explain? That would have been my question. Can you explain, when you say you're not of the love and light, what does that mean? Instead, oh, sure, it makes perfect sense. So tell us about Egypt. This is like an ancient aliens question. Ra says this, I am Ra. The identity, if you forgot by this point, the identity of the vibration Ra is our identity. We as a group, or what you would call a social memory complex, made contact with a race of your planetary kind, which you call Egyptians. Others from our density made contact at the same time in South America, in the so-called lost cities, where their attempts to contribute to the law of one. Now, I'm kind of lost on this. I'm trying to piece this together, because in the esoteric tradition, Egypt was a byproduct of the downfall of Atlantis, or at least not Egypt specifically, like the culture, but some of the ideas and some of maybe even the technology was imported into Egypt from what was remaining from the downfall of Atlantis. In this case, Atlantis is spoken about in the Law of One. In this case, Ra is saying that they're the ones that made contact with Egypt. So this would have been after Atlantis, and they're the ones that built the cities in South America. So you can see a lot of things here happening, where the interest in like lost civilization and artifacts and ancient aliens, this plays into that. So you get people like, I mean, you could read like a Graham Hancock, and he is considered alternative, but he's a journalist that documents things and points out correlations and myths. And I like Graham Hancock a lot. And you can look at it from that point of view, or you can do what a lot of ancient alien people do. And what they do is they're like, well, look, there's a pyramid here and a pyramid there, and aliens definitely built those. And that's the link. And then the Law of One just confirms that, because they built stuff in South. They didn't say pyramids. They just said they built things there. So they must have been, that's what they built, the lost cities, the pyramids there. We spoke to one who heard and understood and was in a position to decree the Law of One. However, the priests and peoples of that era quickly distorted our message, robbing it of the, shall we say, compassion with which unity is informed by its very nature, since it contains all, it cannot abhor any. I think this is probably one of the reasons why people that believe in the Law of One really don't like other religions, but they kind of pull in some of the Christian angle to get donations on YouTube. I think that's probably part of this. And it's also interesting, like you would reject the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Zendavesta, the Bible, etc., for the Law of One, simply because Ra says, well, religion is just distortion of what we taught. Well, good. I'm going to channel something. I'm going to channel Heka, Heka. the source of magic in Egypt. Maybe the only being that had more power than Ra, the underlying source of all things. So I'm going to channel Heka, and Heka is going to tell me that Ra was lying in these channelings. It really should be that easy to disprove this kind of stuff, because I can channel something. I'm going to do it right now. I am Heka. Ra is a liar. Buy my book. No refunds. Why don't you trust me? Why don't you believe me? It's another thing I don't understand about these channelings. Anybody can just make a claim, put it out there, and, oh, well, did you hear what so-and-so said in the channelings? I don't care what they said in the channelings. But it confirms what I don't care what it confirms. I'm not interested in the channelings. Does this form a sufficient amount of information, or could we speak further? I skipped a verse here. When we were no longer able to have appropriate channels through which to enunciate the law of one, we removed ourselves from the now hypocritical position which we had allowed ourselves to be placed in, and other myths, shall we say, other understandings have more to do with polarity and the things of your vibrational complex, again, took over in the particular society complex. Yeah, but again, see, the problem with myth is not about separation and division. It's actually quite the opposite. You know, myths are not about making things complex. They're about making them simple. They're about synthesis. They're about unification. They help us to understand humans. They help us to understand civilization, society. What exactly are we doing as humans? What is the purpose of all of this? What did our ancestors believe? Myth helps us to do a lot, as Joseph Campbell pointed out for decades, and his books still do today. So when Ra's like, yeah, those myths don't matter, this is probably where the idea of religion doesn't really matter and myths don't really matter, because we got the law of one. And the law of one is all things are one, so don't worry about those other things because they don't matter. They're all part of it anyway, so who cares? That's why people dismiss myths. They're evil, they're demonic. People dismiss religions. It's evil, it's demonic. Instead, the law of one teaches that all things are one. Isn't that kind of what a demon or a devil would say? We're not of the love and light. Don't trust religion and spirituality and myths. Don't understand the spiritual side of the self. Don't understand the physical, civilizing nature of the human experience. You don't need to worry about any of that. Just all is one. And you will assimilate. And if you don't agree with us, we'll sue you. Remember, Corey Good got advice from the Blue Avians of how to proceed with a lawsuit. So apparently you can even channel things that you can channel legal advice. Make sure my aliens are Jewish aliens if I'm going to channel legal advice. My first question, do you have a yarmulke? Do you have several parents that died in the Holocaust? You've got 3 moms that died in the Holocaust. Wow, it's horrible. So can you give me some legal advice about this issue I'm having? If I'm going to channel aliens, they're going to be Jewish aliens who lost parents in the Holocaust. Questions. The question was lost because the questioner was sitting too far from the tape recorder to be recorded. Oh, that's a bummer. So Ra responded, I am Ra. Consider, if you will, that the universe is infinite. Just like no one's ever said that before. No one's ever said that. Let's see. How much more of this is left in the first session? Oh, there's a bunch of it. How much more of this do I want to read? Oh, yeah, this is an important one. Can you say anything? Pay very close attention to this one. Can you say anything about the coming planetary changes? And actually, this other point here is really important. Let me read this as well. In truth, there is no right or wrong. There is no polarity, for all will be, as you would say, reconciled at some point in your dance through the mind-body-spirit complex, which you amuse yourself by distorting in various ways at this time. So there is no truth. There's no right or wrong. That's that moral relativism thing, which arguably, again, is kind of satanic, because there is clearly a definition of what is right and wrong. Like, don't molest children. That's pretty clearly wrong. But Ra would say there's nothing right or wrong about that. It just is. So that's pretty dangerous. But if we go down here, can you say anything about the coming planetary changes? Now, remember, this is something that a lot of these people, especially David Wilcock and many, many others, Laura Eisenhower and others, have talked about the planetary changes, You try to narrow it down. Where does this idea come from? Is it science or is it science fiction? Apparently, it's science fiction. Ra says, I am Ra. I preferred to wait until this instrument had again reached the proper state of depth or of singleness or one-pointedness before we spoke. The changes are very, very trivial. We do not concern ourselves with the conditions which bring about harvest. Questioner, another question. It is possible to create an acceleration of understanding in other entities or all efforts, et cetera, et cetera. So Ra says those changes are trivial. Now, later on, they talk more about this. But just from that line, wouldn't that mean that all of these claims of like the world's going to end, there's going to be cataclysmic events, wouldn't that kind of mean that Ra is saying, they're going to be trivial, nothing big's going to really happen? That kind of throws a proverbial wrench in the proverbial gears of a lot of these end times prophecies. Maybe I'm wrong. Moose Girl makes a fantastic point in the chat. Moose Girl says the questionnaire is a narcissist, in my opinion. Oh, it's not just your opinion, Moose Girl. It's also my opinion. I'm pretty sure it's clinical, too, that the person asking these questions is a narcissist. The person asking these questions is like David Wilcock. Don Elkins is like David Wilcock. He was always interested in UFOs, always interested in the paranormal and philosophy. He starts asking questions. And you'll notice that none of these questions are based on anything really relevant, and they're all kind of based on his already assumed beliefs. So that's why you get the kinds of responses that you do, because it's all kind of, when I say staged, I don't mean fake, but I mean staged in the sense that it's all based on like a scripted belief. It's all part of something that Don Elkins already has in mind. So he just goes into explaining or asking through Ra, and not just Don Elkins, because he's not the one responding. It's Carla Ruckert. She also had a background in similar things. She was a telepathic contact. She experimented with group meditation. So I think that psychics are real. I think that you can actually channel things. It's probably just your unconscious. But I also don't believe about 97, 8, 9% of psychics. And if this woman's a psychic, it's possible that she could be a legitimate psychic, where most legitimate psychics don't do a lot of work and they keep it secret because it drains them. Or she could be a psychic like David Wilcock and many other people that claim to be psychics, where they just close their eyes and are like, all right, I'm feeling something. Okay, you have a relative who's dead. Oh my God, yeah, my grandpa died 13 years ago. How did you know that? It's the spirits. They told me. Does his name start with an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q? It starts with an R. How did you know that? Well, it's the spirits. And was he between the ages of 1 and 500? Yeah, he was 90 when he died. I can't believe you knew that. It's amazing what the spirits know. Yeah. It's amazing what kind of stuff people will pay for to make themselves feel better. I'm missing some of the chat here. Let's go to the chat. Noka said, great show, Ryan. Thank you, Noka. I appreciate that. I saw somebody saying here, but yeah. Nathaniel said, Hecka endorses all of your books. Yes, of course, Hecka endorses all of my books. And for the record, if you don't know what Hecka is, I don't even know if you could really find much of a reference online to it. Maybe you can. Oh, here it is. Yeah, Egyptian deity. Magic and medicine. Here's the World History Encyclopedia. You could read about Hecka. Can I put that in the chat? Does it let me do that? Oh, and by the way, I did see some issue in the chat earlier. I made Flux in the chat. I could make a few people moderators, but I don't like spending a lot of time talking about that stuff, so that's why I didn't say it. So let's see if we have... Okay, we'll make Flux as a moderator, Well, let's do. I don't want to make people upset if I don't give everybody moderation status. Let's give a couple moderation status to people that have been here a long time. Jackie, you could be a moderator too, and we'll make Miss Dostokos if you want to be one. Joe Ryder, if you want to be a moderator too. I think you already are a moderator. I could make Tim Curley a moderator. We got a couple moderators. All right. So if you need to moderate something, you can, but I don't really think you have a need to. And oops, there's a screen of me on the screen. I apologize for that. I have to put the moderators in through the YouTube page, not on my StreamYard link. Okay, let's look at some of the main talking points of the Law of One as that takes us through the first session. My God, we could do 106 episodes of this. Let's look at some of the kind of talking points of the Law of One. Okay, now the Law of One is considered to have like decades of research behind it because people like Don Elkins were doing UFO research in the decades prior. Since the 1950s, they were doing UFO research. Now, when you hear UFO research, what does that exactly entail? Does UFO research mean, like in today's world, modern UFO research could mean that you go to places where there have been UFO sightings, you talk to witnesses like a journalist would do, or UFO research could mean I went to YouTube and I watched fake UFO videos that I thought were real, and then I shared them. That's my UFO research. And I don't really think that constitutes as research. I don't really think that is valid, but that is a type of research that people do. They went to YouTube and they saw something on YouTube, and that's the research. Not really research, but okay. So I don't know what kind of research Don Elkins was doing. And when Carla Ruckert has a history since the 60s and 70s of doing group meditation, it could be legitimate group meditation, like people get together and meditate, no big deal. Or it could be the kind of group meditation that people do at like the Integratron, where sure, there's something valid about the science behind it, perhaps. The Hertogs won't let anybody in there now unless you're part of the cult. I think the Hertogs bought it. They are a strange couple. And no, it's not because they're Jewish. It's because they are extremely rude and extremely arrogant and very narcissistic. I've had them on the show. They're super narcissists. I think that they don't let certain people go to the Integratron now. I think they own it. But you go to the Integratron and you just lay down and you do like a sound bath. Now, granted, I use sound baths. I'll turn on like a Buddhist crystal bowl, what they call crystal bowl sound bath. I like that sound. It is actually relaxing. Sound and frequency are healing. But you also need to understand the science behind it, or you need to understand the traditional methods of producing that music. And so if you just are like I got a water bottle here, and sometimes if you hit it just right, or I hit my cup here, it sounds like it sounds harmonious. If I drink this tea and I'll hit the cup and see if we can make a sound. Let me do a David Wilcock drink. That's a David Wilcock impression because he doesn't know how to, ironically, doesn't know how to swallow. Okay. There we go. See if you can hear it. All right, that's my cup, my steel cup that I got at the Daiso dollar store here in Japan. And sometimes I accidentally hit it. Yeah, I'm not going to spill it on my computer. I don't sit it on my computer like David does. Keep it up to the side so if it spills, it doesn't spill on my $2,000, $1,800 computer. $1,800 I paid for this thing. So I sometimes hit it and I hear that sound, and then it kind of reminds me like I should probably go and lay down and listen to some of that music sometime because it's really nice. But I don't know if that sound, I don't know if that is exactly the kind of quote healing frequency that I need. So healing frequency, like it is a scientific thing. If you just hit a metal cup it's probably not, like, if I hit that metal cup over, it's probably not going to make me feel better. It might remind me to go meditate, but it doesn't make me feel better. And that's kind of the issue with group meditations or crystal ball baths. It might sound nice, but again, the whole thing with like heroin supposedly makes you feel really good. That doesn't mean that it's good for you. Okay? And I don't know why that needs to be said. Like, well, I got something good out of the law of one. It taught me to love and have light. Okay, but that doesn't mean that it's good for you, because the devil also tells you to do whatever you want to do. Just enjoy life, and there's no consequences for your actions. Brad Pitbull said, "Can you sip the tea through a long circus straw?" I'll have to get a long circus straw for the next show. Yeah, I could just have the straw from over here all the way, wrap it around my computer and back around the microphone, and we could have a silly straw. That's what most of this stuff is. It's pretty silly. So, group meditation. It could be legitimate, or it could be an orgy, because some people use sex for meditation. I don't think that that's what the woman was doing, but Carla Ruckert could have been going to, sex orgies, and now it's meditation. You never really know, is the point, what exactly people mean when they say they're a UFO researcher, or they're a channeler, or they went to meditations. You never really know, do you? Okay, so let's go through and knock out these core points here. The Law of One talks about the social memory complex, the idea that civilization reaches a point where all individual thoughts are shared in a collective hive mind or unified consciousness. Now, this, you could say, is purely science fiction. We can find this in Star Trek. That would be the Borg collective, right? We can also find this in Arthur C. Clarke, Childhood's End. The overmind represents the ultimate evolution of species into a collective consciousness. You can also find something similar to this in a specific episode of Star Trek. And I'm going to have to look it up because I honestly don't remember the name of the episode. Although I'm sure if I mentioned it, someone in the chat could pull it up fast. It's the hive mind that's like black goo. Anybody remember that episode? It was the first season. Skin of Evil. There it is. Armus, a very malevolent entity from Star Trek, that's Next Generation Star Trek. Skin of Evil, episode 23, season 1. So that's also a hive mind. A hive mind's not usually a good thing. Now, you could derive the idea of a hive mind out of a misinterpretation of the Godhead and the Son of God. If you interpret the Godhead as being like an actual hive mind, like in a technological sense, then sure, you can see that as a good thing. But if you understand the Godhead, it can't even really be unified, because that would imply separateness. To say that the Godhead is a unification and the all that is kind of implies that there's nothing. That's why you can't give it a name. That's why it's that thing that which shall never be named, because if you name it, you degrade it. You polarize it. You can't name God. If you name God, it's sacrilegious, blasphemous, and it takes away from the blank authority of God. So if you're saying that there's a hive mind, this is a good thing, I would check on that. Densities of existence. The universe is organized into densities, levels of light and vibration through which souls evolve. Now, there's a couple of things here. One, science fiction. It's kind of like Space Odyssey, even an Interstellar. But really, this is an old story. It's the story of Inanna and Ishtar, their descent and ascent into the underworld. Orpheus goes to the underworld. Persephone is in the underworld. Horus is in the underworld. It's a slightly different story. But in the case of Inanna and Ishtar, they go to the underworld. They go through the 7 gates. They have the ornaments, or the body is stripped away, and then they are put back together. That's the shaman going into the underworld, being torn apart and put back together. And that is in a nutshell, that is the idea of ascension. Like you're awakening, the body's being dismembered, you're being pulled apart. And if you're being pulled apart, that means not the physical body, but the different aspects of the physical self. It is in essence the destruction of the ego. That's what's happening. And that's what's happening with the shaman when they go to the other world. They get assaulted and pulled apart, and then they get put back together. And they bring knowledge to help their people. So the idea of densities and levels of light and consciousness, that is like the foundational core of most magical systems. That's like the foundational core of most death and resurrection myths. There's not much that's older than that in the human historical, mythological, occult, if you will, record. Service to self versus service to others, the polarization of consciousness. Ross suggests that you have to choose between service to others or service to self, which is really similar to the Bene Gesserit in Dune. It's really similar to the Jedi and the Sith in Star Wars. It's really the dark side or the light side. Then there's the Orion group. That's the negative crusaders. That would probably be the Black Hats. Ra describes this group of entities from Orion who seeks to enslave others through manipulation and control. So, that would be like They Live or The Matrix or like any theology ever. Then you have higher density souls, the wanderers who incarnate into third density. They forget their origins. I mean, that's kind of like Stranger in a Strange Land, the man who fell to earth. It's also kind of like, in a sense, it could be maybe Superman too. It's a bunch of things. And it's also Lucifer in a way, and it's also just like the very foundational nature of, again, the development of philosophy. Jackie says Hindu, Vishnu dreams up the world, and all of us, we are different facets of the gods having an experience on their behalf. Yeah, but Ross said, Jackie, Ross said, then there's the veil of forgetting. People forget where they came from. How many times you hear this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again? I liked it when Philip K. Dick wrote about it, personally. I kind of like it when you get the same idea from like every fairy tale, like every myth and every popular story, like every archetypical character and the process that character goes through to die and resurrect in their respective stories. I liked it better the first 10 billion times I heard it. Then there's the harvest, the cyclical window of time where a planet's population goes to the next density. And this is where we get the idea of ascension. The problem is it doesn't happen physically, and there's a lot of crossover between that idea and, of course, the idea of the rapture, which is also a fabricated interpretation, like an interpretation that led to a fabrication of like a physical. We're all going to be taken away, and our clothes are going to be neatly folded on chairs. And okay, so the bottom line is this: the Law of One is a forgery. It is a satanic and Luciferian and devilish document. But it's also valid because it strips from science fiction, and most science fiction is taking from the secret teachings. And anything that is real about it, relating to even how Gene Roddenberry channeled things for Star Trek, and that might have been the unconscious, and the 9 have something to do with the different aspects. There's like 8 gods of China. There's the 7 spheres of the body and of the solar system, the 7 chakras. The 9 has something to do with the body, I'm sure, and the internal and external components. And it's probably the unconscious. And if anything, you're tapping into the Hall of Records, the collective human experience. Law of One should not be sold as a course or anything like that. It should not be sold as truth. It should be sold as a science fiction story that you might learn something from, and that's really the best that I can do. Law of One, Law of Raw. If you don't like it, guess what? No refunds. tstradio.info, rdgable@yahoo.com. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Everybody in the chat, thank you for joining us, staying with us from the start to the end. If you missed any of the show, please go back and listen. buy me a coffee, support us on Cash App, buy a book, Occult Arcana, or Garden of Hallucinations, or Liberty Shrugged, or my new book, Protocols of Goyim. You can get all of those at tstradio.info. If you don't like the advertisements, that's okay. I don't like the ads in the free archive either. But they finance this show, and when you listen and hear those ads, that keeps us on air. That is about, I think it's about 75, 80%, something like that of our income. If you don't like those ads, subscribe on the website, get access to the ad-free show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. And I will talk to you on the next broadcast. Have a great night.